Well, good morning, everyone, and how are you doing today? Fernando!
Yes.
What's happening?
Not much, you know.
Ready for the show?
I'm ready for the show.
So on today's show, we're gonna address a viewer question. By viewer, I mean a lot of you guys asked this. We thought, hey, you know what? Let's make a show on it so that we can just put a nail in it and you guys will have some place to go when you need this information. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Cut to the intro. One of the questions we get asked a lot on the live show, in the comments, is I have a factory radio and I'm gonna put some form of DSP, high level to low level, amplifier or something onto that factory radio. How do I do it without cutting my harness? Today, we're gonna talk about that. We have all the methods that we use, all the methods that you could possibly use on your end, hopefully, and let's get started. So what we have right here is a stack of T-harnesses that are from Access, which is Metra. We have some high level to low level style DSP slash amplifier stuff. And then of course, we're gonna grab some of our bags over here on the wall and we're gonna talk about how to get these things to work. First up though, let's grab these green boxes and get them on the bench. So earlier this year, Access, which is Metra's electronics division, released this guy. This is the AX DSP. And we did a full review on this and how you're gonna integrate this in your car and all that. We actually put it in a Camaro. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. And so doing that, with coming out with this product, they came out with these guys here. Now these are all T-harnesses. Now you're asking, well, what's a T-harness? But before we get to that, let's look at all these that are available for you. So these red ones here, these are all GMs. These blue ones here, these are all Fords. We have Hyundais, Hondas, Chryslers, Nissans, Toyotas. So this allows you, if you have one of those vehicles, to pull the radio out and plug in an adapter that's gonna get you speaker level output so that you don't have to cut the plug. Cool, right? Well, for those of you that aren't familiar with what a T-harness is, let's open one up and take a look at it. So this is a Nissan factory radio. Let's flip it over and take a look at the back. On the back here, you'll see all these white guys here. These are the factory plugs. What you're gonna notice is there's no RC outputs on this, as you already know because you're trying to hook up an amplifier and you're trying to figure out how to do it. So let's go ahead and grab this guy. This is the Nissan harness. Now inside the box, you're gonna have this guy right here. It's got this end on it, which is what would be the factory. So we'll plug this into here. And then we'll take the other end and we'll plug it into what would have been plugged into this. So it will plug in just like that. So now what this allows us to do is we take this cool factory Nissan radio, we unplug this harness, and then we can plug this harness in between the factory and this radio. What that's gonna give us is output from the radio that's gonna feed into the DSP and then out of the amplifier back into the factory wiring harness. Also on this, because it's for a DSP, it has this plug. This is gonna be for their DSP. If you're not using their DSP, you just can remove this or leave it, just cap these off. But don't worry, what we're gonna do is we're gonna dress one of these up and show you the different options available to you with said harness. So the real question is, what is the difference between, let's say, a T-harness and let's say just a regular harness that you would use to install an aftermarket radio? Can't you just buy a reverse of this and combine the two and make a T-harness? Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. Let me show you why. So in some cases you can get lucky enough and buy like this guy here, which is what would plug into the factory harness for adding an aftermarket radio, and then get something like this, which is what's called a reverse harness, and this would plug into the back of the radio. You can combine these two and you can make a T-harness. But there's an issue. If we look closer at these two harnesses, you'll see that there's a lot more wire in this harness than there is on this harness. Because this harness was designed with integrating in an aftermarket radio, not retaining the factory radio. This harness here was designed to retain a factory radio. So all these holes, all the wires, everything is filled in. This one isn't. That could be a problem because in some cases, things like steering wheel controls and data bus are on said harness. They're not on this harness. So if I combine these two, all these extra wires somehow need to get fed what's on the other side of this. That means it's not gonna work. Now a true T-harness, if you'll notice, all the wires and all the holes are filled. Whether you need them or not, there's a wire going from one harness to the next harness. So that means if there's some kind of strange data or steering wheel controls or parking lights or whatever that need to be through a T-harness, will have it. So in some cases you have no options. Like you buy two of these and you add in the pins and you make a T-harness because none of this stuff is available for you. In which case, these are called BH A's, and these are called BHOs. In the Metro line, this is called a 70, and this is called a 71. And those are gonna be the numbers or letters put in front of it when you're going to find it. For example, this is a 5800 harness, so this is a BHO 5800, and this is a BHA 5800. If this was Metro, this would be a 70 5800, and this would be a 71 5800. Now that we have our T harness, and we're looking at these two different ones here. So this one is for the Metro DSP, and this guy here that we went ahead and grabbed, this one is actually for Bluetooth. This company here, CarAV, makes Bluetooth add-on cables. These come from Europe. In some places you have to have Bluetooth in the car if you want to talk on the phone. This company makes T harnesses so that you can go ahead and add in the Bluetooth. These are also a little bit cheaper than these. However, these you can usually find at a local shop. These are coming from Europe, so these take about 2 to 3 weeks to get in. There is no other advantage between these and these. There's nothing else there. They're both gonna do the same thing. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna talk about what we need to do to these in order to connect them to something like an LC7i, high level to low level adapter, some form of DSP processing like a DM608 or a DSR1, or if you bought some form of an amplifier that has a high level to low level built into it already and you just want to integrate it that way. All of these are situations where a T-harness would do amazing things. The thing about the T-harness is that, as you can see, the wires are kind of short. We have something for that as well. We use a product called Speedwire, which is this stuff right here. Now what Speedwire is, it's a 9-conductor wire. So we have our white pair, our gray pair, our green pair, and our purple pair, as well as a remote turn-on built into it. It's all shielded in what looks like about a 4-gauge size wire. Now there's two different kinds of this, so be careful. Make sure you get the 100% oxygen-free copper and not the CCA. You want to make sure you get the right stuff. This is typically an 18-gauge wire, which is fine for what we're trying to do here. So now let's go ahead and take our two different T-harnesses and we'll mock them up so that we can use them in a car. A special note when you're working with the T-harness, don't assume that like a red wire is accessory and a yellow wire is battery and a black wire is ground. Don't assume any of that. Don't even assume that these speakers are the right things. Most of the time they are, but sometimes they're not. So you definitely want to do some testing. So in this one we have this loop here. There's no tape on it. It's kind of nice. This is for a Ford. You guys ask all the time, which one did we use in Haley's car? It was this guy. So this is a CarAV 12240. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and prep this for putting it into a car. To do that, the first thing we wanna do is get rid of all these extra things here. We don't really need them, so we can go ahead and remove them. So we'll cut off the power here and ground here, and we'll repeat the process on the other side. Now you'll notice this red wire on this particular one. This particular car, this red wire, this doesn't even exist in the car. So what we want to do is go ahead and remove the tape off of here. And we'll go ahead and insulate over it. Now just because it's not an accessory, that doesn't mean there's not, let's say maybe a data wire or something like that in that location. So we want to make sure that it's properly insulated. Now what we need to do is we need to combine our yellow and black wires together. In this case, as you can see, they're a tad short. Now if your DSP, something like a DSR1 here, requires a constant 12 volts, you can go ahead and grab these constant 12 volts and attach them to your DSR1. Unless you want to run it in the back, in which case you're going to hook it up to a distribution block. That's up to you. So what I like to do is go ahead and cut these just a little bit shorter. And then we've gone ahead and connected them up. Now the reason why I like to go ahead and cut them a little shorter is so that we don't have these two solder points really close to one another, because that takes away some of the flexibility of the wiring. We want to make sure that this is nice and flexible up in the dash, because we're adding in an extra foot and a big wiring harness, so sometimes it's really tight in the dash behind these. Now we'll go ahead and tape it up so it looks pretty using some of our exterior Tessa tape. Now looking at the harness, this end here is going to be plugging into the radio. That means these are going to be the signal that's going to feed our high level to low level. And then this side is going to be coming from our amplifier and going out to the speakers. There's a couple things you can do depending on how you want to do this and how you're going to run it. You can reuse this if you like to make a cool plug that you can unplug and remove, or you can just cut them off, solder in both connections. I like to just go ahead and remove them and solder in both connections. Now another thing that's helpful to do is go ahead and take some colored shrink wrap or something that will mark the wires and put them on either end, like this. And the reason why we want to do that is a lot of the times we'll have two pieces of speed wire coming up to connect to these. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing on those speed wire, so that when these get up into the dash, we'll know that this one is supposed to go to the output of the radio and this one is supposed to go to the speakers. Just makes it a little bit easier for the install. Now from this point, all we have to do is strip back our speed wire, connect it, tape it up, and we're all set and ready to go. We have a T-harness. This is all ready for a Ford. You're done. So let's say now you want to connect your T-harness to your high level to low level adapter. No problem. What we have here is on this particular one, we've tested this, so we know that these colors here are our standard colors. And how we would test that to make sure is we would plug this end in here and we would test them with our tone generator or a 9-volt battery by popping the white and the white black and see if that pops the driver's front door. The grays should do the passenger front door, the greens should do the driver's rear door, and the purples should do the passenger rear door. If all those are correct, then we know that they're going to be correct on this side. So now we can just come in and connect them into our input harness, making sure that you use the black stripe as the negative. And in this case, we can just go ahead and plug them into the LC7i. And we're all set. This end is going to be plugged into the radio, and this is going to supply this with the signal it needs to give us our 6-channel output. So that's what you have to do for an LC7i. Now, a helpful tip. If the front output actually has a full range signal and the rear output doesn't, meaning let's say there's no sub coming out of the rear channel. The rear channel is what feeds channel 3 to create your sub output. All you have to do is switch them, so that you feed the front channels into channels 2 here in the back. And what that's going to do is that's going to feed a full range output out of the output 3 here. You just have to make sure that you connect your front output to 2 and your rear output to 1. And that'll give you full sound. Now that same process will work for something like a DM608. You have your high levels here, you're gonna feed those in. But what if you have something like an amplifier here that has a funky plug like this that plugs into the side of it? Well, the nice thing about this plug is it has the same colors that this has. So you have white, gray, green, purple here, and you have white, gray, green, purple here. So now all you have to do is solder these two together. You may need to put a speed wire between them, and then plug them into the amplifier. And now you've accomplished the same thing. You're going to be using the high level input on this amplifier coming off of the radio. And then you can connect this side here like that, and now you've completed the circle of life, and that the radio output is coming into the amplifier and the amplifier's output is going back into the factory harness. As you can see, that's why speed wire for this is so handy, because it matches up. Now on some amplifiers, they don't have a high level plug like this. They just use the RCAs as the input. No problem. Some amplifiers use something like this pigtail here, where you have these speaker wires on one end and an RC on the other. Now a company like Pioneer gives you this guy with their amplifiers that's designed to plug into the amp, and then it has the open wires here that would just connect to these. You can also buy something like this. Stinger makes them, as well as Kicker makes them. There's a couple different companies that make these adapters here that allow you to go from wire to RCA. You can also buy something like this, which will allow you to make your own RCA simply by soldering a wire into the center pin and a wire to the shield. And of course, worst comes to worst, you can cut the head off of a standard RCA and make your own version of this. Rockford uses this on the DSR-1. Now this particular input has these RCAs already on it. It's very similar to this. As you can see, they have a white, a gray, purple, and a green. And if you cut these off, they're designed to match up to these wires that are coming from your T-harness. If you don't want to cut these off, you can also buy a female version of this, solder those onto here, and then just use a standard RCA between the two. Now on a DSR-1, it has a high level to low level adapter built into it. You just simply flick the switch. Now the nice thing about not cutting these off is if you ever were to swap out the radio for an aftermarket radio, if you solder on a female RCA here, all you'll have to do is then remove the radio and plug in your new radio and flick this switch on the side. And it's already high level and ready to go. Now let's go ahead and look at the Metro version of this, see how prepping this is a little different. First thing you'll notice is that it's all taped up. We need to get this tape off. It may take a minute or two. Now if you know somebody that sews, go ahead and grab their seam ripper, and that'll make it a little bit quicker. And as a last resort trying to get the tape off, you can also just use a razor knife. Just be real careful using this because you don't want to cut any of the shields on the wire. Just kind of work your way ever so slowly and make sure you have a really sharp blade. The sharper the blade, the easier it is to cut this stuff. So once we get all the tape off, that's going to expose everything here and we can kind of see what's going on. In these particular harnesses, they design them a little bit differently in that they're not feeding power and ground in and out of a unit. They typically just come off of one end and go to their harness. Now this is the harness, these wires, these aren't going to be used for anything because we're not using their DSP. So we have this little guy right here, which is feeding our red wire. We can go ahead and do the same thing. We'll remove the tape off of this. Now as I said, if in your case you need some form of accessory wire to do what you're doing, make sure you test this with a digital multimeter to see if it is in fact an accessory. Now in this one they just Y in the constant 12 volts. So for that we'll just go ahead and we're going to pull this pin out and we're going to cut off the side that we don't need with our flush cutters. Now what's left once we've gone ahead and removed the power section from that is we have this funky thing going on here. We have wires that are coming out to here, so we can go ahead and just remove this, get rid of it because we're not going to need it. And now we have this plug and this. These are going to be the outputs from the radio. This is going to be the output to the speakers. We can do a couple different things here. We can just solder on new connections here, or if we want, we can cut off all these little crimp points here and remove this harness from the assembly, and then we can use that plug into this guy here, kind of like we could have done on this one with those two plugs. You can make a quick disconnect, but what I like to do is just go ahead and I'm going to remove this. Like we said, if we wanted to, we can make this so we can bring our speed wire soldered onto here, and we can make this removable if we need to. It's entirely up to you. But I like to now go ahead and remove all this shrink wrap, exposing this connector like this, taking a little bit of solder, go over their connection, and then add a new piece of shrink wrap. Now I'm gonna go ahead and do this to all these. So now that that's done, quick note with these Metro harnesses, these colors are accurate. So unlike this one where you're like almost sure they're right, these are going to be right. So now that we've gone ahead and soldered up these wires, we can go ahead and add some finishing touches to it. And our T-harness is complete. We've added in the two color ends, so when we use our speed wire, we know which end is which. So now when we go ahead and take our factory radio, we plug this harness into here. This is gonna plug into the car side, and we have our outputs from the radio that we can then take to our high to low and do the same exact thing we did with this harness. So as you can see from the two completed T-harnesses, it really doesn't matter whether you go with the Metra or the Car AV, they're gonna get you to the same place. Both companies don't make all the T-harnesses. So Car AV has some that Metra doesn't have, and Metra has some that Car AV doesn't have. Now the Car AV harnesses, we get those off of Amazon. We wait to 2 to 3 weeks, we usually buy 3 or 4 at a time. The Metra ones, we get from Metra. We order from them all the time. That's why I say if you're in a hurry, probably find a Metra dealer near you because you can get them a lot faster than you can get the Car AV harnesses. Alright guys, we hope you found this extremely helpful. Like we said, this is a question we get asked a whole bunch about these cool T-harnesses because no one wants to get a car and cut the harness behind the radio. In a lot of cars nowadays, you have to do high level to low level because you can't replace the radio, or the radio has all the features you want. Keep in mind, the only time you can really use a T-harness is if your factory radio has the generic 4-channel output. So let's say it's a touchscreen in the dash, it just has front, rear, left, right, 4-channel output. A lot of radios still have that. If your radio has a factory premium sound system, such as Beats by Dre, Bose, Infinity, Sony, something like that, then you're gonna want a totally different product. You wanna get into an Amp Pro or the iData AR. Check those out. You can find those at pack-audio.com and of course, idatalink.com/maestro. You can find these T-harnesses on Amazon. Just search under Car AV and your model and harness. You can find these harnesses at metraonline.com. There again, enter in the make, model, and year of your car. If it shows the AX DSP, will be a T-harness next to it. Alright guys, good luck on your installs. You have a wonderful night as always. Fernando.
On to the next one, guys.
Exactly. Bye.